Hey there, it's Anne Marie, the anti-HR lady, and today in my video, I want to talk a little bit about why there's so much issues between white women and black women in the workplace. So if that's of interest, let's get into it. Hey there, this is Anne Marie, the anti-HR lady, and on this channel, I talk about employee workplace issues, and I try to educate employees about their workplace rights so that they know how to assert them if they believe that they're being violated, especially when there's discrimination in your workplace. I talk about these issues from the perspective of being a black woman who worked in corporate America for 25 plus years, and someone who worked in management and oversaw HR and also happens to have a law degree and a license to practice law. However, I talk about these issues from the perspective as being an HR professional, which I was for 20 or more years. Okay? If that's of interest to you, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, comment constructively, and share this information with anyone you think might need it. So, one of the things that I try to do on my channel that might be a little bit different than other people is that I talk about a lot of issues in the workplace that nobody really talks about but exist and impact the way that we interact with each other and the issues that a lot of us as black women deal with in the workplace. And today I'm going to talk about whiteness, white supremacy, and white women. Okay? So, some people are going to be in their feelings by the end of this, but that's okay. Some of these things are things that people don't talk about, but they need to be talked about. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So about a couple weeks ago, I put up a little poll in my YouTube community where I asked a question, and I'm looking at it right now, and then I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can see it. But here's what I asked. If you are experiencing discrimination or other problematic treatment in your workplace, how would you identify the main person causing the harm to you? And I put up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 choices because that's all that the YouTube community poll system allows you to do. You get 5 choices. My choices were white men, white women, black men, black women, non-black person of color, right? Now I'm going to put up on the screen for you the results of the poll. Take a look. So as you can see, 90 people answered the poll. I left it up for about 10 days. 90 people answered. So this is not a scientific poll by any means, but I still wanted to get the perspective of people who, follow me on my channel. And this is before I had a big influx of new subscribers. But I wanted to get the perspective of people who follow me on my channel and see if their responses aligned with the data I have from the people who contact me for discovery calls and who a majority of them say their supervisors are when people come to me saying that they're dealing with discrimination in their workplace. And so overwhelmingly, as you can see, 54% of responders said white women, 19% said white men, 7% said black men, 10% said black women, and 10% said non-black person of color. And if I had the opportunity, I would have broken out what I meant by person of color. But what I may do later is do another poll and dig into more how people have experienced people of color when you break them down by group, because I would be actually interested in that data. Now, I am not a person who's a big fan of polls. I think polls can be very misleading because, for example, the sample size of this poll is 90 people. Right? So that obviously is not representative of every workplace, but I think the response is very indicative of what I also get in my discovery calls, right? So it was very interesting to me. I did not expect it to be 54%. I had a feeling that white women were going to lead in this group based on my personal lived experience, the experience of people that come to me. But I did not expect them to lead by 54%, right? But if you are a person who, understands how polls are used to shape public opinion and things like that, as I do, I, take results unless it's something that I have a lot of in-depth knowledge about. I take a poll result with grain of salt, especially when it comes to politics and like all the polls we're putting out about the presidential elections. I ignore all of that stuff because usually the sample size is about 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people. And to me, that's not representative of a country of hundreds of millions of people, right? So all grain of salt, but I find it very interesting. For me, it was more that it was 54% that really struck me, right? That's a huge majority of responders indicated white women were the reason that you were the group that was causing the most harm in the workplace. And this tracks for me with my experience in the workplace, right? Overwhelmingly, women as a group have been the most difficult for me to deal with in the workplace. And overwhelmingly, white women have been the biggest problem throughout my career. It didn't matter where I went, from when I started in my 20s, when I first got into HR, all the way up to the day I left the corporate America as a country and moved abroad. It has always been white women. And even now in my life abroad, I find white women to be very problematic, even when I interact with them, particularly white American women. And I live in Mexico. I live in a town where there is a significant presence of immigrants, American immigrants, because I don't believe in the term expat. And I can get into a whole video about why I think the term expat is being misused, because it's really a term that came out of human resources. But there are a lot of immigrants here, a lot of us from the United States, Canada, primarily. And I find, as usual, that white women to be very problematic. And that the people that I usually have to check and put in their place the most when I interact with them here is white women. But let's talk a little bit about why that might be. And so, I don't know if you're on TikTok, but if you are on TikTok, I have a friend and colleague. Her name is Tammy. She goes by Delusional Influencer on TikTok. She has a channel here. I think it's called Empathy. She told me the name of it, and I will put it up on the screen because I don't remember off the top of my head. She doesn't really concentrate on YouTube, so she doesn't post a lot of content here, but she posts really great content on TikTok. So I highly recommend following her if you're on TikTok. She talks a lot about diversity, DEI. She talks a lot about HR and how it works, because she's a former HR professional. Well, she's still an HR professional, but she used to work in HR like I did. And she talks a lot about why things are the way that they are in not just our workplaces, but our society. Because what happens in society impacts our workplaces. Our workplaces, a big thing to understand about what you experience at work and why you experience a lot of things you experience at work, particularly those of us Black women, is because your workplace ain't nothing but a microcosm of the larger society. So whatever is happening in society is going to encroach on your workplace. So if out in your society, a autocratic authoritarian figure has arisen, who a lot of people are following because he espouses the same, white supremacist, racist ideologies that they've always espoused and wanted to say things out loud that he now says, right? And this person got to be elected president, then of course in your workplace, you're going to experience more white people being openly racist, right? More of his followers being openly racist because they're in your workplace. They're your managers, they're your co-workers, they're on the board of your organization. So you're going to deal with more of this in the workplace. And now that this person is running again to get back in to the White House with a very clear agenda from those who back him about what they intend to do this time around, because they weren't as successful as they wanted to be last time because they didn't really understand how the structure worked. But now that they understand how the structure works, their plan is to come dismantle everything, destroy all the offices that were created to protect people's workplace rights and so on, and create a Christian nationalist state. But I digress. Y'all know I'm going to talk about Project 2025 anytime I can. But these things are showing up in your workplace is what I'm trying to make you to understand. So don't expect that your work environments are going to get better especially this year. And if God forbid this person gets back into the White House, well, heaven help us all, right? Help the world, honestly. Because people think, right now, I believe this person is claiming that they don't know anything about Project 2025. I think if you go on his website and read his agenda, it's pretty much right, like a same version of the same thing. They just don't say it as directly as what they say in Project 2025. And when you consider who is backing him, the people that worked in his administration before, many of them have been involved in writing this document. So if you want to believe that he doesn't know anything about it and that he won't institute the things that are in there, just take a look at the Supreme Court. Who appointed those people? And where did the recommendations of the people he should appoint come from? Go do your homework. Google is free. Okay? So again, as I always say, don't go for the banana in the tailpipe. Think critically, because this time, when they say vote like your life depends on it, it actually does this time. Vote like your freedoms depend on it, it actually does this time. But anyway, as I was saying, these things are going to show up in your workplace, and it will benefit us to better understand why, right? And as you know, my mantra is always, all roads lead to white supremacy in the United States and really in the larger world, right? Because, I'm a global citizen. I travel all over the world. I've been to over 35 countries, very close to 40 at this point. I don't really count. Anti-Black racism is unfortunately not just an American thing. It is a universal thing. It's a global thing, right? And in order to understand why white women operate the way that they do in the workplace, we've got to dig in a little bit to white supremacy, right? Not just in the United States, but how it operates, right? And anti-Black racism. And it's very important to understand that, white women have been socialized, especially in the United States, to behave and operate in a certain way, right? And with the way that Black women have been socialized out of necessity to behave and operate is literally almost at odds with the way that white women have been socialized. So white women have been socialized to be passive aggressive, to be fragile, to pretend that they don't know things and that they can't understand certain things in order to seem weak so that somebody will want to help them, right? Black women, on the other hand, have been taught, especially Black American women, but also Black women outside of America have been taught primarily because out of slavery, you had to do a lot of things out of necessity and for survival, right? And keeping your family together, protecting your family even when you were the only one there to protect it, carrying the weight of everything has been something that we have also been socialized to do, right? And all of it comes out of white supremacy and the slave experience, right? And the aftermath. Because when slavery ended in the United States, it actually didn't end. It just morphed into something else, right? First, it was kind of a type of new wave indentured servitude, and then they instituted Jim Crow after Reconstruction, if you know anything about the history of what happened after the Civil War, right? So it didn't really go away. As I always say, racism and white supremacy never goes away in the United States because it is literally embedded into the structure. So what it does is it shifts and it changes shape as time goes on, but it never goes away, right? And we're dealing with a new version of it right now, right? Which is, it used to be more passive. Now it's becoming more overt again, right? The way it was. They want to go back to, post. Maybe they might not put you right back on the plantation, but they've got a new type of plantation and they want you to stay on it, right? And so they are trying to take the country back, not just to the 1950s. They want to go back to like post right after Civil War era, right? And so the question becomes for not just people of color and Black people particularly, but women, is whether that's where you want to go, right? But white women have been taught and trained to first and foremost put their race above everything else. So when they talk about femininity and, feminism and we're sisterhood and stuff, There is no sisterhood without intersectionality. And when you're dealing with a group that first and foremost has decided that people should be divided based on color, and all of these are their creations. We didn't create none of this. And that the people who have white skin should be at the top, right? And that there's certain benefits that they should have in a society, right? Based on that. And that white supremacy cannot and has never been able to function effectively, could never function effectively without the support of white women, as well as people of color and Black people. We're all paying our parts in keeping this system going, right? White men created it. It's theirs. They created it, right? And it benefits them most of all. It's the white patriarchal system that is part and parcel of white supremacy, benefits them most. But it could not have survived in the way that it has up to this day without white women holding it up. They're holding up one end and they're holding up the other end. And then they got some of us holding it up in the middle, right? We're going to get to them in another video, the ones in the middle. But right today, we're talking about white women. So they have been a partner in this all along. You know, if you spend time reading slave narratives, which I did when I was in college, and it's very hard to read if you know, there was a time when historians went around and they actually interviewed former slaves to write down what their experiences were as slaves on plantations in the South, because people needed to know these things. And I'm grateful that they wrote it, but it's painful to read. But you can go online on Google and Google slave narratives, and you might be able to read some of them online. It's worth reading, especially if you're a Black person, it's particularly Black American. But you will understand that the mistresses were in many times just as harsh, if not more harsh, right? Than the husbands, the wives, right? So there's a historic, relationship there where, Black women as slaves were literally raising the children. Some of them were nursing the white babies, right? And then on the other hand, this person owns you and can sell your kids away and beat your ass if you even look at them sideways, right? And part of the reason that I say that I believe that white people are genetically encoded at this point to not have empathy, just as I believe that we as Black people have been encoded to be servants. And it doesn't mean you can't undo it, but you have to first recognize it and then actively seek to undo it, because it's something that you've been taught over generations and generations and generations and generations, that white people are better than you and that they belong at the top. And it was beat into our ancestors, right? That they have a right to do the things that they're supposed to do. And then you're also taught that if you want to go to heaven, that you're going to be a good, obedient slave. We ain't going to talk about the role of Christianity and all of this, but it plays a role in this. And you see that it is at the top of the agenda that people are trying to push now, is this idea that everyone must be a Christian, and everyone must not only be a Christian, but function as a Christian in a very specific way, mandated by the white supremacist system, right? So they use religion and they use this idea of whiteness, right, to keep themselves at the top, to this day, at the top of the food chain. And white women are a big part of this. This system could not survive and thrive in the way that it does to this day, right, without them. And that's why you see all these different videos circulating around, and it's often white women. They call them Karens and Beckys and all these names, but it's often white women that are the ones engaging in the very problematic behavior. In my personal experience here in Mexico, it is often white women who feel that they have the right to come up to me while I'm sitting minding my Black ass business in a restaurant, just sitting somewhere minding my business. They think they have the right to come up to me and ask me who I am and how I got here and what am I doing and all this thing. And they do it under the guise of being friendly, but it's not friendly. It's not friendly to interrogate a stranger and basically ask them for their freedom papers, which is what I consider that to be. I travel all over the world. I have never walked up to a white person and interrogated them about why they are somewhere, because I don't care. It's none of my business. But for some reason, when they see Black people, Black and brown people, but especially Black people anywhere, that they think you're not supposed to be, right? They think they have a right to come up and ask you questions. And I just don't tolerate that at this point in my life. I don't deal with that. Don't ask me a goddamn thing, right? Because how I got somewhere, just let's assume I got there the same way you did, on a plane, a train, or a bus. Don't ask me anything about how I got somewhere, right? But that's an indication of a certain type of mindset. And because people have been doing these things for so long, it doesn't even occur to a lot of them, right, that what they're doing comes from this idea of whiteness and white supremacy, right? But that's where it comes from, because it's been genetically encoded. So when you're in the workplace, right, because we need to talk about how this translates into the workplace, you experience the same things, right? So a lot of times, when you go into environments, especially for environments that are predominantly female, but this shows up everywhere, but it's especially problematic in environments that are predominantly female. So if you're working in HR, you're working in the healthcare system, you're working in the university system, this stuff shows up a lot because there are a lot of women working in these environments, and a lot of white women working in these environments, right? When you're working in HR, it's really tough, right? Because of this. That there is this passive aggressiveness, because it's never comes, the thing I found with dealing with white men in the workplace is that I could read them very easily. I always tell people I have a PhD in white folks, period. I worked with them for 20, 30 years, and most Black people can make this claim, at least that they got a bachelor's degree. But in order to succeed and thrive for long periods of time in these environments, you got to get to PhD level. But you're thriving with it. There's an expense to all of this stuff. There's a psychological and mental harm to all of these things that you don't even recognize until you're out of it, of how much it has harmed you, having to spend all this time studying them and understanding them so that you can survive them in the workplace and in the larger society. But I spent a lot of time observing, just sitting and observing and paying attention to the way that women interact with each other in the workplace, but especially the way that white women not only interact with us, but how they interact with each other, because they don't treat each other that much better in the workplace than they treat us, right? And it all comes from this idea of needing to be accepted and liked, this desire for being liked and chosen, right? And the people they most want to be liked and chosen by is white men, right? And then everybody else, their friends, their parents, whatever. And they're taught early on to never say what they really mean, right? To laugh or cry to get their way, right? So one of the things I would notice a lot in the workplace when I was dealing with them is that anytime, the first thing they would do when you came in as a Black woman was try to, a lot of times, measure you up. So they start asking you all these questions, trying to get in your business. And then they would try to pretend to befriend you, right? Again, to try to figure out, your weaknesses, your whatever. And then they try to get you to join whatever group they were in. And there are always cliques in the workplace when there are women present. There are always cliques, right? And really quickly, you would figure out who were the people who had believed themselves to be the queen bee and the leaders of the clique and whatever. Every work environment I've ever been in, there's been some type of setup like this. And if you were someone like me that has no interest in being anybody's clique and in anybody's club, then really quickly they wouldn't like you as much because you were in a clique, you're not as easy to control. If you're not desiring to be liked, you're not as easy to control. But I found pretty much always that this was present, especially when they were women leading, that this was present. And since, as Black women, we also engage in the clique thing because it's a female thing. I've observed it to be. But because there's so many fewer of us in positions of authority in these environments, it's usually a white woman leading the charge, unless it's an all Black work environment, which is a conversation for another day. Then you're gonna notice that you're being pulled in different directions from the time you come in the door, because people want to size you up and determine whether you belong and who you belong to, because they think they own us. I really believe that. It may be unconscious on some of their parts, but they really still have that mindset of they have the right to be wherever we are and be in our business, and that they have the right to ask us questions that they don't have any right to ask somebody in a workplace, and that when you push back on that, that you're the problem, not them, right? And so when you're in the work environment with them, you will deal with some of that stuff. You'll deal with a lot of it, right? The other thing is that white women recognize that in society, they're not first class either. They're below the men, but they are determined to ensure that they stay there and that they don't drop any lower. So when you come into the work environment as a Black woman who has all these knowledge and accomplishments and skills and so on, they may have hired you because you have those things, but they also don't like you for it. And they're worried about the fact that you might challenge their position, right? Because like I said, they know that they're not at the number one spot, but they'll be damned if they fall below 2, right? So you're dealing with that as well. And that's why I think so many Black women particularly have hard time working in the environment white women, because right away the white women go into competition mode. We are not doing that, they are, right? And white men don't worry about their position because they know they're at the top, right? So when you come in, they're not usually even thinking of you that way until something happens that directly challenges them. Because they know they're at the top. So I don't think that white men, are in any way better. It's just that they function differently in the environment, right? So, but white women, from the time you come in the door, see you as a threat, right? And I think the same thing happens between white men and Black men. So when I talk to most Black men that come to me who are having issues at work, are working with white men. Most of them. Some of them are also working with white women and also non-Black people of color. Usually it's a white male or a non-Black person of color who might be male or female, usually with men, with Black men. But with Black women, it's overwhelmingly white women, right? And I think there has something to do with the similarity in gender, where I think white men see and treat Black men more of a threat in the work environment from day one than they do Black women. Because to them, we're not really a threat until we do something that directly challenges them. On the other hand, I think white women see Black women as a threat from day one, right? And so from the first day, you're dealing, the microaggressions start and all these things. And if you're your supervisor, it starts even sooner. When they're your coworker, first they try to size you up and figure out whether you're a problem that they're going to have to deal with, and then they act accordingly. But when your supervisor is a white woman, it becomes a problem much sooner, I think, because I think they see you as either an ally or competition right away, and they're right away trying to figure out which box to put you in, right? And if you don't want to do the things that they like to do to pretend that they like each other, then they don't like you. Because I've seen white women engage in horrific treatment of each other in the workplace. And the only people they treated worse was Black women. But they treat each other horribly as well, because they do the same thing to each other. They do this, they compete on the basis of looks and this and who lives where and whose children go to what school. And it's all tied to positioning themselves either to be accepted or chosen by white men, right? And so when you come into the workplace, and don't let it be a situation where your supervisor's a white man and they like you. Because I'm going to give you a little story. When I was younger, in my 20s, and I was pretty attractive in my 20s, right? Pretty girl. I was a pretty girl when I was in my 20s. And I was completely unaware, as often we are in our 20s, of that men found me as attractive as later I realized that they did. But I was a pretty girl and I was smart, right? And I was very much about trying to get to, in the beginning of my 20s, trying to finish college, because I graduated from high school a year early, but got distracted by a lot of things and actually ended up finishing my college later because I ended up having to go part-time in the evening and work full-time. And I did the same thing for law school. So I was really trying to, finish college, get my college degree so that I could go to law school. I had a plan. I was working on it all the time. So I also was not, paying attention to a lot of things that were going on. But I was working as a legal secretary in a federal agency. I came in there as a temp. My white male supervisor took a shine to me very early on because he said I was smart, and also because he said I knew dictation. Well, let me explain something. I didn't know no dictation when I went to work there. I taught myself dictation. I figured it out. I did that a lot in my career. I'm sure a lot of you will relate to that. I figured that shit out. I figured out, what the dictating machine was. I figured out how to make it work, and I figured out how to listen and type the stuff that he would use on the dictating machine. He never told me anything. I actually had one of the other legal secretaries, who was an older Black lady. She was lovely. She actually pointed out the dictation machine to me. I had no idea. My temp agency sent me there. They put me to work for him, but me and him ended up getting along really, really well. I figured out how to do it. He said that multiple other people they had sent didn't know how to do it and had not been able to do it. I figured it out. So he really liked me. And we were working in an office where there was another secretary on the other side, a paralegal, and how many other lawyers were in there? Three other attorneys, I think, 3 or 4 other attorneys. And when I got there, it was him. He was the senior attorney in the suite. And then there were 3 other guys. One was one level below him, and the other 2 were a little bit underneath the other 2. So there was one other senior attorney, and then there was a more junior guy and 2 other more junior guys. And then there was another secretary in there. So I primarily worked for the most senior person, and then I would also do stuff for the other person who reported to him if I had time, right? I worked in that suite for probably about a year before one of the guys left, and they brought this white girl to work in there. And from the day she got in there, it was a problem. Now, the other assistant who worked on the other side was supposed to support the other attorneys in there, right? And I was supposed to support my person plus the person that reported to him if I had time, because he gave me a lot of work to do, right? And I prioritized his work because he was my supervisor. And then if I had time to do stuff for the other attorneys, I would, but not if I didn't. That was kind of how the system worked. This person comes into the office and immediately starts talking to me like I work for her, right? And coming and putting stuff on my desk and telling me she needs it to be done. And I had to politely tell her many times that she needed to go down the hall. There was a kind of a secretarial pool down the hall, and that she could ask those people to do stuff because I was busy, because I had to do his stuff and the person that reported to him, and then everybody else came after them. And she would get an attitude. She would get snippy because she seemed to think that I was supposed to do whatever she wanted. And I finally had to say something to my supervisor about it when she came and got snippy with me, and I had to check her, right? And he had to have a conversation with her. And then she got even more of an attitude with me because basically he told her to leave me alone, right? And so when it came time for my evaluation, they all got to have comments on my evaluation. But he was the main person who wrote my evaluation. She tried to put a bunch of negative stuff in my evaluation, and he talked to me about her comments. I pushed back on it, and he took them out of my evaluation. And she was pissed about that too, right? And I got a raise and all that stuff. Because all the other attorneys had no problem with me. They thought I was great. They thought I was smart. I was very accurate in my typing and blah, 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 blah. But she didn't like me because she felt that she was above me. She couldn't be above the other guys, but she felt that she was above me. First of all, she's an attorney. I'm just, the secretary in the suite. So I'm supposed to bow and scrape to her as the other girl on the other side did. And the person on the other side was they had a lot of turnover in the other role, right? And sometimes it was a temp. Sometimes it was someone would be hired, then they would leave because it was a lot of work. So they would come to me because I had been there. But at this point, I ended up being in that job for about 3 years. And then I left, went to my next job where I became an executive assistant. But they wanted me to do work for them because my work was good and it was accurate. But my thing was, he's my boss. his stuff was always prioritized ahead of anyone else's, and then everybody else. And so she was really upset that she couldn't just come in and tell me what to do, right? And that she wasn't above me in the way that she thought she was. And that the most senior white man in the suite is the one who had to basically break that down and let her know that I reported to him. And it literally got to the point where he was like, if you need something from her, you need to come talk to me first. And she was not happy about that. And then a couple months after my review, she was moved out of the suite. Don't ask. She didn't quit. She wasn't fired. She left. But they removed her from my suite and put her somewhere else. I don't know if that had anything to do with, one will never know. I never really spoke to him about it, right? But she was removed from the suite and replaced with another guy who was just absolutely lovely. And we all worked in that suite happily together until I decided that I needed to make some more money and I left, right? And they were all, they threw a party, they took me out. I remained really close to several of the attorneys in that office, and my boss I kept in touch with, and he actually wrote a wonderful letter for me when I applied for law school. He was very, very proud of me when I got into law school. He was very encouraging, and I often tell people I would never become a lawyer if it wasn't for him, because I had actually thought at one point that it was expensive applying to university. It was not cheap, and I was not making a lot of money at the time. And I thought, oh, well, I was talking to one of the one person, other white girl in the office was a paralegal. And she was actually really nice. And they would work her to death too. But I was talking to her about being a paralegal and what it required. And she was telling me about it. And I thought, maybe I will just be a paralegal. Maybe I'll just apply to paralegal school, put the dream of going to law school to the side and just be a paralegal. And so I went to my boss and I'd gotten, the application for paralegal school. And, they still wanted you to get a reference letter. And so I said to him, I'm applying to paralegal school and I need a letter. Would you mind writing me a letter for me to apply to paralegal school? And he looked at me and he said, no. He said, I'm not going to write you a letter for paralegal school, but I will write you a letter if you apply to law school. He said, you're too smart to just be a paralegal. You need to be a lawyer. And if you ever decide to apply to law school, I will write a letter for you. And I thought about what he said, and I decided I really don't want to be a paralegal. I want to be a lawyer. I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was 8 years old. And I went back to him and told him I changed, like probably a couple months later, I told him I changed my mind and I decided that I'm going to apply to law school. And he was really happy about it. And he wrote me a letter, as did a couple of the other attorneys in the office. And you would have thought his child had gotten into law school when I got into law school. So, and I wasn't even working there anymore by the time I got into law school, but he was a really, really nice man. He's passed away since, but he was a really nice man. And honestly, if he hadn't said what he said to me, I might not be a lawyer today. Right. So that's the juxtaposition of how I experience him as a white older man in my office versus the white woman that I had to deal with. And not just her, but how, we as the secretaries would talk about who the most problematic lawyers were. And it was always the white female lawyers. And as I went, from there to other places, I went on to a nonprofit from there, and went into an environment that was predominantly white at a very well-known reproductive health organization that was supposed to be about women's rights and women's reproductive rights and all those things. And the way that women treated each other in that workplace was not the greatest. And the way that I was treated in that workplace was very problematic because, as I explained in another video, a lot of them thought that I was just the executive assistant and they didn't have to respect me, but they learned, right? And so I have found over and over, and at every place I went, that women were very difficult to deal with, and that they would attack my communication style. They could never attack my performance and my ability to do my job. But throughout my career, at each level I moved up to, it became how I communicated was a problem. Why? Because I did not do that cheesing, smiling, fake politeness. That is something that they are taught early on, that you're supposed to smile. That's why even in interactions that you will have with white women anywhere, they go to the fake smiling thing. Even when they're upset, they're doing the fake smile, right? And I have a friend, and she's white. I have two white female friends, the actual genuine friends. And I remember we were working together, both vice presidents. And I would observe her in meetings where she would, one of my friends, she would laugh when she was disagreeing with someone, or make a little joke when she was trying to say she didn't agree with something. And she would said to me more than one time how much she admired the way that I communicated in our senior management meetings and in our smaller executive meetings, which just were the people who direct department reports and the president. She admired how direct I was and how I was able to be direct and distill, information down and so on, but do it in a very unapologetic way, right? And I said to her once, because we would, go to lunch, we would have drinks. We used to have a monthly happy hour, just the two of us together. And what was funny about it was that she had a lot of white women reporting to her, and they hated me. They hated me because I refused to be in their clique, and they couldn't control me. And they would come to her and complain about me and talk about me real bad, and they thought she didn't like me. Meanwhile, she and I were really good friends. We're still friends, and we would go to happy hour, and she would tell me everything that was going on. And we would laugh. We would make plans together for dealing with different problems in our departments and the problem people. And these women swore she was, they're on their side, basically. But they didn't know. We would always make sure we met up somewhere away from the office that was unlikely that anybody from our office would show up there. So we never went to any of the bars or places around the office. We would meet somewhere else. And we would sit for hours and just laugh and drink cocktails. And we both, love shoes, really love great shoes and a good cocktail to this day. So I said to her one day, because she was telling me how she admired how I communicated. And we had just come out of a meeting where she had to push back on something that someone said. And this person was a person that reported directly to her, who I thought had been extremely disrespectful to her in the meeting. And I said to her, why do you do that? Why do you laugh and joke when people are being out of order? And she told me that it was because of how she had been raised, right? And it was almost a defense mechanism for her now, where she would laugh and try to be self-effacing to be less threatening. And I told her, you need to stop doing that. I said, they don't respect you, because this was early on when she got there. I said, and they're going to continue to do this. I mean, this person was very disrespectful to her. And I told her, he tried it with me in a senior management meeting when I had just gotten there. And I went in like a champ on his ass professionally, but I did. I let him know that he didn't know what he was talking about and that he needed to sit down and be quiet when I was talking, right? And I checked him. And I told her, this person doesn't respect women, and he doesn't respect you as his boss because you're his boss. He should have never said the things that he said, challenging you in the meeting. Even if he didn't agree with you, he could have done that outside of the meeting. And so I told her, you need to have a conversation with him, and you need to make sure that he never does something like that again. And she did. She did. But I found over time, as we worked more together, that she's never, a general communication style has never really changed, and it didn't need to. But she became less apologetic and self-effacing over time. And she told me that it was the things that I said that helped her, because I was like, people don't respect that, right? And so, and you need to be your genuine self. Whoever that is, you got to figure out who that person is and be that person. And stop apologizing for being the smartest person in the room, which you often are. She's a brilliant woman. And I was like, don't be ashamed of that. Don't be in there apologizing to these men because you know more about this subject than them. You know more about this subject than them. And they need to respect that, right? And stop laughing when you correct somebody. It's not a joke. If they're wrong and they're being out of order about standing up with their chest and talking and not knowing what they're talking about, you don't need to laugh and smile at them when you correct them. You don't need to, yell at them and be rude to them, but you can authoritatively yet respectfully let somebody know that maybe they got it wrong this time and they need to be quiet and listen and learn, right? Instead of talking about something they don't know what they're talking about. And so what I learned from her and we're still friends, we were just talking on the phone last weekend, is that this is something that people are socialized to do, right? Because she's not the first person that has said that to me, that they were basically taught that there's not supposed to, challenge people and that there should be, passive about stuff and, those kinds of things, and the tendency to cry. Because she and I talk about all these things, like, where the hell does that come from, right? It's socialized, right? And that when you're angry and upset, instead of saying I'm angry, upset, you cry, right? And Black women, we've learned that when we cry, nobody cares. It's not that we don't want to cry. Sometimes you're so angry that you want to cry, but you realize that if you cry, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to change their behavior, do anything different. While white women have learned that when they cry, everybody listens. And so they can weaponize their tears. They can cry. And it's not just weaponizing your tears to put somebody's life in danger and then calling the police on them. In the workplace, they also weaponize their tears, right? So if you correct them and they start crying, then the focus stops being on the wrong thing they did and instead on you being mean to them and making them cry, right? And they don't just do it to Black women and Black people in the workplace. They do it to everybody, right? Because I had someone once say to me, they were talking to me about an issue with my former boss, who was the president. And I was saying to them, well, why don't you tell her if this thing that she's doing is such a problem and is undermining your authority on your team and blah, blah, blah. I said, why don't you talk to her about it? And he said, because every time I try to have a conversation with her, where I raise a concern about anything she does, he said she starts tearing up. And I don't know what to do when she starts doing that. So I just don't say anything. He said, as I say anything that's critical about how she does anything, he said she starts to look like she's going to cry. And I don't want to be the guy that made my boss cry. So I just leave it alone. And I was like, did it occur to you that that's why she does it? So that she don't have to have the hard conversations that you want to have, right? Because she tried it once with me, but then came to realize that her tearing up was not going to stop me from saying what I needed to say. And then I called her out on it. Because I was like, we can't have an honest working relationship if every time I raise an issue, you start to tear up. I also said that to another woman who, her staff came to me, members of her staff were all women of color, and primarily Black women, but also a couple of women of color who were non-Black, had come to me to raise concerns about a manager. Their supervisor was a department head, not a department head, a unit head. And one of the things they said to me, because, I was the first and only Black woman, so when anybody had a problem and they were Black or brown, they would come to my office, which was fine. And I would try to help them. And these women were not just Black women. They were also they were not American, because we were a global company. So they were from other countries. So there's cultural issues and around authority and colonialism and all these things come into play. So it was a big act of courage for a lot of them to come to me to even say that there was a problem. So I felt obligated to not only try to resolve and address their problem, but to protect them. And so I had a meeting with the two women that were over the team, the person that they were most complaining about, as well as the person that she worked with on the project. And I was explaining and with my HR manager, who was a new person in the company, who's also a good friend of mine to this day. And I said, I wanted to have a meeting with them to talk to them about the issues that had been raised by this group of women, because it was like several of them who came to my office and had to talk to me about it. And I start talking to them about the concerns, and I don't name any one person. I just tell them, these are concerns that have been brought to me by multiple people on your team. And I just wanted you to be aware of it so that we can come up with a way to try to address some of the issues were HR related. Some of them were not, but we could come up with a way to resolve the HR related issues that we're all on the same page and about wanting to support them and da-da-da. This woman starts tearing up talking about, I don't understand why they would come to you and why they didn't come to me. And this just hurts my feelings. And I'm so hurt. And I stopped her right then and I said, first of all, stop crying. I told her there's no crying in leadership. I said, you're a leader of people. And you don't get to cry when I come to you to raise these concerns. I said, because when you start crying, I said, this is why they don't come to you. I said, when you start crying, it stops being about their problem and then becomes about you. And that's not the way leadership is supposed to work. It's supposed to be about them. I said, do you think I don't go home some days and want to cry? You think some days I want to sit in my office and cry because some of the things that I have to deal with in here? I said, but I know that there's no crying in leadership. So you got to man up and do what you got to do. Woman up, man up, however you want to say it. And lead the people and support the people who work with you, who need that. So I'm going to need you to stop the crying. And let's discuss how we can address the issues that are being brought to our attention. And after that meeting, my HR manager said to me, I've never seen anybody do what you just did. She said, and as soon as I said that, all the crying stopped immediately, which means it wasn't real tears. She was using her tears, to steer the conversation where she wanted it to go. But when I let her know that that was not going to fly with me, the tears evaporated immediately, because I let her know you are not a victim here. You are not going to turn this into, your own private victimhood party, right? And try to say that they're bad for coming to me. I said, who else were they going to go to? You want them to go to the president? Who else were they going to go to? I'm the vice president responsible for oversight of HR. The HR manager is new. She wasn't even here yet when we had this conversation. So I'm briefing all of you. And we're going to come up with a way to address the issues that were raised. And what we're not going to do is be up in here crying and making this about you. And so that's an example of how tears are weaponized in the workplace, not just even in our larger society, but in the workplace, in order to shut a conversation down that somebody doesn't want to have, right? And to deflect often from you being the wrongdoer in a situation. You start crying. And as I said, the reason that Black women don't do it is because it don't work for us. When we cry, nobody cares. But white women have learned over generations that crying is actually to their benefit. Being weak or pretending to be weak is to their benefit. And they don't like Black women a lot because we don't operate in that way. We have our own problems in terms of how some of us lead and manage people, right? But we don't go revert to the crying, because the crying don't do nothing for us. Being weak don't do nothing for us. We've been taught that we have to be strong and we got to take it till we break, which is horrible. But that's what we've been taught. They, on the other hand, have been taught that if they cry, everyone will come to their rescue, and do. And that everyone will believe them even when they're lying if they throw some tears on it. And so they have been socialized to do that. And we're being harmed by the way that they operate, and they are also being harmed by the way that they operate. Because then they wonder why they can't be treated in ways that they want to, and it's because they're seen as being weak, right? And also not trustworthy, because they not only do this to us, they do it to each other. Don't get it twisted. They break out the tears against each other too. I've seen them engage in some heinous treatment of each other in the workplace, and undermine and create whisper campaigns and run people out of organizations with their tears and their lies, and done it to each other, not just to people of color and other men. I've seen it all working in HR, right? There's so many stories I could tell about the things that I've seen white women do to other white women. So that's why I'm like, if they're doing it to each other, what I learned very quickly is if they're doing it to each other, they will not hesitate to do it to me or someone that looks like me if it serves them. And that they also believe that we are supposed to be, as Black women, subservient to them. And I think Black men experience some of the same things with white men, right? So that's why I push back. I am not pushing a narrative that white men are better. I just think they don't see us as Black women as a threat in the workplace in the same way, while white women do see us as a threat. And so the interactions are different, right? Now, when people ask me, well, how do you solve this problem? I really don't think it's a problem that Black people can solve. I think it's a problem that Black people need to be aware of so that you know how to govern yourself when you go into these work environments, right? And that you know to, first of all, understand that you're at work, that they're not there to make friends, and that you should not be surprised if you end up having problematic interactions with white women in the workplace when you're a Black woman, because of the way that they have been socialized to view and treat you and themselves, right? And that they need to feel superior to somebody, and somebody they're most likely to want to feel superior to is you. And that's a part of whiteness, that the desire and need to be superior and to feel superior and to feel that you have a right to inflict your belief of superiority on the group of people that you believe you are superior to, right? And so with white women and Black women, that's how that plays out, right? But it all comes from whiteness. The idea of whiteness and the idea of white supremacy is where it comes from. And so I think it's really important for us as Black women and Black people to understand where this stuff is coming from. And you can't fix it. I always say, if, Black people could do something and snap their fingers and end white supremacy and whiteness, because it's all a social construct, right? We would have done it already. We have done everything. We have marched, we have cried, we have fought, we have died, right? To be treated like human beings in American society and in the larger world, and yet we continue. So clearly, if this was something we could fix, it would already be fixed, right? But anti-Black racism is part and parcel of the system in the United States of America and elsewhere. And in a later video, I'm gonna talk a little bit about why immigrants and Black Americans have the friction and the issues that they do in the workplace. That's coming soon. But I wanted to talk about the white women because that poll results, it didn't surprise me that they were at the top, but the gap between them and everyone else did surprise me, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the intersection of whiteness, white supremacy, and white women, and why they're all hand in hand together, right? And so when white women talk about feminism and we're all women and we should all whatever, and I always say you first, right? Because I have yet to interact with a white woman that put her gender above her race, and I'm Black all day, and I make no apologies for it. I tell people that all the time. I'm Black first, foremost, every day. I'm a Black woman, but I am Black. I don't say I'm a woman Black. I'm a Black woman, and I operate from that experience, right? And but the reason that I have to operate from that experience is because I have learned that it does not serve me to jump on the we all sisters woman bandwagon, because that's not how it works. They say it, but they don't mean it. And as James Baldwin says, I don't believe what you say because I see what you do, right? And so I can't be up here talking about women, we're all sisters together, when you up there putting your whiteness ahead of everything else and your proximity to white men above everything else. And I've seen that all the time as well. I've worked all the time where I've seen over and over how white women promote the patriarchy in the workplace. I worked with multiple white women as presidents and top executives. Never had a good experience, right? And I remember pointing out to one president that I worked for the reality that the data showed that the white men were being offered higher salaries, entry in the door, equal education experience than women across entry level, middle management, everywhere. And this was a woman-led, majority female organization. And I called it out because we did a survey. We were reviewing the salaries, right? I also found that I was the lowest paid executive. We fixed that too. But in fixing it, I had to not just fight for myself. I fought for all the women who were in the executive, because all of us were being paid lower than the men, except the president, of course, who was making a gazillion of money, but doing the least. But this woman was resisting the idea of closing those wage gaps amongst the women. And I had to push back and raise a little bit of hell to make sure that I got pay equity, but not just that I got pay equity, but all the other women who were being underpaid got pay equity as well. And that across the organization, there was some pay equity and some training done. Because clearly, It was an idea that white men should be paid more. Even at entry level, they were being offered more money, right? And these were women, white women, primarily making these hiring decisions. It wasn't men, it was them. But they believe that men should get more, especially white men. And so even to a white man and a white woman coming into the company entry level, same experience, same everything, they're offering a white person more. And why? There are lots of reasons for it, right? One is the belief in the patriarchy, but also because we found white men negotiate. I don't know if their daddies taught it to them at the baseball team, but white men always believe they should make more money than everybody else and will not hesitate. They just came out of college. They don't never work nowhere, but they still think they should make more money than everybody else. So they will ask for more money. And then the white women would give it to them because they asked. And guess who don't negotiate? Guess who don't ask for more money? Us. The worst are black women, in my experience of doing recruitment at the executive level. And then white women don't push, like negotiate. They offer you this, you take it. You so happy to be invited to the party that you take it. White men, I have never ever in all my years of recruitment and hiring, right, offered a white man a job and not had them come back and ask for more money. I don't care what level they were at. And I was primarily doing recruitment at the senior management and upper management level because I was helping select executives in a company. When I got involved in it, it was at that level. And I can honestly tell you, I don't know why my nose is scratching me today. My allergy is probably getting ready to start up. But I can honestly tell you that men, generally speaking, always negotiated and white men always asked for the most amount of money. That's just my professional experience. While the worst ones in terms of not asking for the right amount were black women and white women right after them. The worst was us, right? But white women also, right? And I have coached friends and helped friends with negotiating. And I'm always having to say that. Like, why are you, like, we don't know our value. We don't sit down and think about what we deserve to be paid. And a lot of us are so used to being underpaid that each job is more money. So whatever they offer, you're happy to take it. And what I've observed with men, and that's how I learned, I was guilty of it too. It's not just them. I was guilty of this. I learned by observing white men that I should always ask for more money and that I should push back on any offer I was given and ask for more money, right? I observed it because I observed it, the fact that not just like across the board, that men always asked for more, even black men. Black men are, in my professional experience, I've never had them not come back and counter, right? They didn't always negotiate as well, but generally speaking, they would come back and counter. And I found time and time again that women don't counter. Women just take what they're given. And if they do counter, they don't do it well, but most of the time they don't counter. And so we have been taught that we are of less value and we believe it. So when we're making these decisions, we don't make the decisions any more different than the men would make it. We want to believe that, because it's women, we're going to treat each other. No, I find women sometimes treat each other the worst in the workplace. Not always. I've had women, be wonderful to me in the workplace, especially black women. Right. So I'm not one that's going to say all black women are terrible. But when we decide to be terrible, we could be the worst. Right. But overarchingly, my worst work experiences in the work environment have been white women. I had a really bad experience with a black woman early in my career, and I observed black women behaving really badly early in my career, and it stayed with me. But my personal work experience, I had one really, really bad experience with a black woman. And I've never forgotten it because it's happened very early in my career. But every single one after that, for the most part, I think there was one job that it was all young white men, 20s, horrible leaders, terrible. But everywhere else, it was white women. Even when men were at the top of the organizations, the ones that came for me consistently and wouldn't let me do my job consistently were white women. So the poll results, as I said, did not shock me. But how overwhelming the results were kind of surprised me because it was a small sample. So I thought, I thought white women would be in the lead, but I was thinking, it might be, 25%, and then, white men, 30% white women. It was 54% said white women were the biggest problem they had in their work environments. So what I would say is white women, especially ones that come into the comments here on this channel and talk about what can I do? And first of all, stop asking Black people what you can do to be a better human being and to not be racist. And Google is free, as I always say. Go read some books. Go learn. All the information is out there if you want it. YouTube is free as well. Google is free. And go out into the world and do the homework, do the work required to learn how to be a better person. And then go be a better person and then tell a friend. But it does take intentional work, but just don't ask Black people to do the intellectual labor to tell you what you need to do, because all the information is out there, right? But if you don't want to be a racist person, you are actually going to have to do intentional work to not be one, because it has been put in you, whether you realize it or not. The system requires it of you, right? And so if you don't want to be what the system has required of you, you have to intentionally decide every single day to be different, right? So the next time you see the Black person walking down the street in your neighborhood, don't think, why are they here? The next time you see a Black person sitting somewhere minding their damn business, especially when you see groups of us sitting somewhere having a good time and being happy, don't worry about why we're there and why we're so happy. It's none of your business. Start from there and then go forth from there. But you have to decide that you want to be different than how you were raised, than how society taught you to be. And you can start with yourself by just working every day to figure out, first of all, who am I authentically? Because many of you have no clue, because you spent so long pretending that you don't even know who you are. Figure out who you are, and then try to be the best version of whoever that person is. Start with yourself, right? And then work to do the homework and the work that you need to do to then also be a better human being in the larger society. And that's why I highly recommend following my friend Tammy's channel, because she talks about these issues all the way, and also from the lens of helping white people and all people, but especially white people, to learn to be empathetic, to learn empathy, because it has been epigenetically bred right out of most of you, to learn real empathy. Because as I said, if there was empathy, there would be no way the society could be where it is or in the direction in which it is going. If there was genuine empathy inside of the majority of white people in America and elsewhere, this anti-Black, anti-immigrant movement that's sweeping the world, not just the United States, and the right-wing fascist movement that's sweeping the world, not just the United States, wouldn't be occurring. But it comes out of a white supremacist, anti-immigrant, Christian nationalist set of beliefs that are extremely dangerous, right? And that's where they're coming from. If there was real empathy for people who are poor, for people whose countries and societies are crumbling because of white supremacy and colonialism, the world wouldn't be going in the direction in which it is, right? But we otherize each other, especially Black and brown people, and it is something that has been socialized and epigenetically passed down through the from one generation to the next. And so if you want to change what you see happening in America and what you see happening in work environments, white people have to do the work. And it starts with women. It always starts with women, because we are at the heart of everything. So if you want the society to change, women have to change it. The men have had all the time in the world and they ain't done nothing, because they're at the top and they like it there, especially white men. So if you want to change it, the white women are going to have to change it. When people talk about how this person got elected president in 2016, it's because white women voted for him overwhelmingly. They voted for him. And with everything we know is coming, a majority of them are going to do it again. So that's why I get so upset when I hear people talk about the Black vote and how Black people are going to vote. I'm like, the outcome of this election is not going to be, y'all not going to put that on us. It's on you. You all keep picking these evil people to be in charge of your government. And you all need to choose differently. And the reason you keep choosing it is because you feel they're going to keep you at the top of the food chain. Right? You figure that they will keep you at the top of the food chain, so you want to vote for them. But you need to understand that nobody's going to be at the top of the food chain except white men when they get done with this. So if you're not going to vote from a place of empathy, at least vote from a place of self-awareness and self-interest. Women, and I'm talking to women here, white women, because you voted him in 2016, and now you don't have any choice over your body and whether you have children or not anymore. All across the United States of America, you don't have that anymore. And that's really what that decision is about. It's not about anything else. It's about whether you get to decide what happens with your body. Because if you can't make a decision about having children, you really can't make a decision about anything else when it comes to medical care. It's a slippery slope, because they can take the rationale they applied there and apply it to any other set of situations. And they will. They've already started. So you need to understand that this is not just about being a better human being. It's about protecting your own freedom and your own rights. So if you can't get to the being a better human being part, maybe think about it in those terms and do better. But I think the problem of, whiteness, white supremacy, and white women is not one that we can solve. But I just want, as we as Black people can solve, it's something that they have to solve. And I hope that they will try to solve it, if not to be better humans, but also for their own self-interest. But that remains to be seen. But I think it was important to talk a little bit about this, because this is something that we are all experiencing in one way or the other in our workplaces, as well as in the larger society. And it's important for us not to pretend that these things are not issues, because they are. So I hope that you found this little chat that I had today helpful, and that you will comment and tell me what your thoughts are on and what your experiences in the workplace have been. But I did find the results of this poll very telling, and I thought it was worth making a video and talking a little bit about it. And I'll be talking more about some other comments, really, some other topics related to this in future videos about workplace interactions, because it's a big part of what determines how we experience work, is the people that we work with and the way that we interact with them and experience them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about also how whiteness and white supremacy impacts the way non-Black people of color, especially those who are immigrants, interact with Black Americans in the workplace. I think it's a very important topic for us to talk about, and it will be a topic coming up very soon. So I hope you found this video helpful. As I always say, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend, but I am. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.